Good evening. This is Political Pulse, and I'm Charles Duffy. Tonight's guest is Mike McCurry, former press secretary to President Clinton, also a senior advisor to the Kerry campaign. Thanks very much for coming.
Oh, great to be with you.
I'm going to ask you a silly question to start off, but what's it like to have a meeting in the Oval Office or to be standing in the Oval Office? I mean, you had presidents like Truman, FDR, Teddy Roosevelt, great figures who worked in that office. When you're in there, do you ever look around and say, God, this is amazing?
Well, you get a real sense of the history of that place, and it's an intimidating experience, especially the first time. But going and seeing the pockmarks on the floor where Ike's golf shoes left an imprint on the floor, looking around at every president configures the room differently. President Clinton had lots of memorabilia from his trips along the way, which he had carefully arranged on his desk. I made the mistake one time of picking up one of his little tchotchkes to look at and put it down, and he got up and had a scowl on his face and walked around and put it back exactly the way he liked it. He had a sense of the history of the place, but also it's customized to each president. But you're awestruck a lot of times, and you have to shake yourself out of that because, of course, you're usually there to give advice, to work through a problem, to talk about some issue of the day, and you have to keep focused on that work. But to do that in those kind of incredibly intimidating surroundings is a hard thing.
So it becomes more like work at some point.
Well, it is like work. I mean, and you're in there every single day, and maybe 2 or 3 times a day. I made a habit of always going in to see the president before I did my daily press briefing every day. That was one of my assignments, and if I had not seen the president for whatever reason, I'd come in and kind of take a look through my briefing book, go over some matters with him. But you're in there 2 or 3 times a day, and it does, after a while, it's part of the routine, and you are working there, but you're always, every once in a while, you just shake yourself and say, wow, this is an incredible place.
And once you leave the White House and you move on, it must be a tough place to not be able to go back to for work. I mean, I know it's a lot of pressure when you're there, but you probably get addicted to it, and there's a certain rush that you miss.
Well, there's a big thrill I drove to work every day and drove right up what they call Executive Drive in between what used to be the old executive office building and the west wing of the White House, and you'd park there. And every day you'd kind of get out of your car and say, this is the coolest thing, because you're right here at the White House. When it all ends, there are one of two things that happen. Some people have a very hard time of separating themselves, and they keep wanting to go back and keep wanting to be part of that environment. Or the other way, and I felt I tried to do more of this, is just turn out the lights and move on, because you just have to get on with your life and do something different and new. And if you keep going back, you sort of get trapped in being a permanent part of the furniture there. And I don't think that's a healthy thing.
Right. And I know you were in Little Rock for the Clinton Presidential Library opening, and now we're 4 or 5 years out from the Clinton presidency, and I know you left in '98, but you were together with other people that you work with, and did you reminisce, and if so, do you see the Clinton presidency differently now than when you were involved?
You actually see, first of all, it's an extraordinary place, and I was surprised at how impressed I was with the facility itself, with the beautiful architecture of the building, with the incredible display of memorabilia and artifacts and documents from that period. But I was also struck with, he made a point of this. It does reflect all that was the Clinton presidency. I mean, it's got the good, the bad, and the ugly there. And it's, he doesn't try to varnish over some of the more controversial episodes, and certainly the stuff that I had to be involved with, the Monica Lewinsky story and other things like that. It's treated in the exhibit there. And a lot of us talked about that as we were kind of waiting in the rain for the ceremony to begin. And we were struck that it really is it's a place in which you can reflect on all the aspects of the Clinton presidency, certainly through President Clinton's perspective. I mean, it's not, I'm sure historians might have set up the exhibits a somewhat different fashion or covered it a little bit differently, but it's a pretty authentic representation of those years. And I think it reminds people of some of the very good things that happened on President Clinton's watch, and some of the positive things that happened around the world in terms of searching for peace and the Middle East and Ireland, in the Balkans. But it covers some of the more controversial aspects of his career too, and it reminds you of that.
But looking back, do you see the Clinton presidency in more favorable terms now than when you were involved in it?
Well, I was, when we were working there, we probably portrayed it in favorable terms as much as we could all the time. I think as time goes on, you see that incredible record of economic growth and progress that lasted for most of the 1990s. And we think back now, particularly now looking back in retrospect, what an incredible period of growth and vitality that was for the nation. We look at the role that President Clinton played in the world and the esteem with which he was held in other countries, much different now. And I think that is quite a contrast for a lot of different reasons. But then you also think about, some of the things that could have been so much better had not there been some of the reputation tarnished by episodes that President Clinton has addressed himself and apologized for.
And I was thinking about his personal choices, and we're all broken and flawed in some regard, but his own personal choices. But those personal choices had a huge impact, obviously since he was president. But on the Gore race, for instance, Gore, I'm not sure he ran a great campaign, but if for that scandal, he probably would have won. I was in South Dakota for this election, and Tom Daschle lost out there, and you saw a lot of tying him to the Clintons on TV, and he basically held the senators in line during that impeachment, and President Clinton may have been impeached if Tom Daschle was not able to do that. So does it amaze you that someone's personal choices have such a huge effect?
Well, they do, and there were a lot of consequences and a lot of ripple effects for events that were solely of President Clinton's own making personally as a man, and he paid a huge price for that too. I mean, I think his place in the history books, and even as you have this sort of ambivalent quality of looking at his library and looking at that exhibit and knowing in the back of it that there was the incredible episode of the impeachment that sort of put a cloud over his time in the presidency. But you do think about the cost that others paid. I mean, the staff people that got subpoenas, the people who were always under some cloud of investigation, the very hostile way in which the political forces aligned in Washington to kind of create almost constant warfare around very personal issues. It was not a healthy time, I think. And if you think about how bitterly divided Washington is even today between Democrats and Republicans, I think some of that got planted in and institutionalized during the Clinton years. We've all paid a big price for that.
And some of it was his own doing, but the Clinton presidency was somewhat under siege. I think some of it was not of his own doing too. But I think about the Bush presidency, and he inherited a huge surplus. We now have a huge deficit. We went to war under a mistaken premise, and I can't think of another time throughout history that's happened. We haven't found Osama bin Laden. 9/11 happened under his watch. And I think back, if this happened when Clinton was presidency, he would, and I can't put my finger on why, but Clinton would have been skewered much more than Bush is being attacked now.
I think that's right. I think because with President Clinton, so much was right at the surface and so raw and so openly exposed, because that's the way his presidency was much more personal and less private. One thing I commend, by the way, President Bush for trying to reclaim some of that privacy. He's a very disciplined person. He doesn't allow a lot of people around him to talk much about the inner workings of the White House or what goes on behind, the curtain. And there's probably some advantage to running things that way. So there's a little less of that kind of raw personal edge on things. But I think you're right that had the same set of circumstances presented themselves with Bill Clinton as president, there'd be a lot more howling for his head, particularly among Republicans in Congress. That was the nature of the times in the late 1990s.
Are the Republicans better at attacking than the Democrats are?
Well, they're better at defining sharp choices and defining issues in black and white. I think I've heard Bill O'Reilly say this one time, and so he's a good person to quote on this. He said, the problem with liberals is they always want to see things in shades of gray. And you want to be good at, sharply defining differences. And of course, his role as a very conservative talk radio host or a TV show host, he likes to paint the issues black and white, point, counterpoint, sharply defined debate. And of course, the press, the media loves that. That's the way they like to portray the issues of the day. And I think that I think sometimes on the liberal left we get a little too caught up in trying to get all the complexities out there, and on the one hand, on the other hand, and we don't sharply define the debate as well as we could. On the other hand, it's more honest to be with the American people to say, look, not all these things are as easily put and defined as they are sometimes presented by people on the right. So you have to balance things out. I think in the end of the day, I'd much rather win the argument based on good, sound analysis and a clear presentation of facts and giving people good choices. And certainly Bill Clinton did that, and that's one of the reasons why he won election as president twice.
Now, you had a tough job as press secretary. You'd have to get out there with the press every day, and they grew to trust you, but it was kind of a rope-a-dope. You hear that boxing term with Muhammad Ali when he fought George Foreman. He was taking some punches, moving his head, and things like that. It was tough, though, wasn't it?
I like to say that I was the piñata for the White House press corps. My job was to be out there and let them whack away at me every single day to see if anything interesting would spill out. You had to keep yourself very controlled. You had to remember exactly what was the line that you were trying to articulate or the answer you were trying to give, and not get distracted by argumentative questions. And you also had to keep in the back of your mind that this is about keeping the American people informed. My attitude was, look, the press is there, they have a job to do. It's their job to try to knock me off my pedestal a little bit because that's the way in which they felt they'd get more at the unspun truth, because they hate a lot of this spin and trying to gild the lily sometimes. But at the same time, if you're standing there and you're thinking, look, people are watching this, they'll see that on cable television, they'll watch parts of these briefings. Sometimes they were carried live. You have to say you've got to try to remember that the American people are sorting this out too, and try to help them understand what is this debate about. And I tried to keep that in mind as well.
We have about a minute and a half left to break, but I was interested to see one of your quotes that you said every time before you did a briefing, you were nervous.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, I mean, I do this show and I get nervous before I come here, but actually giving a briefing at the White House, my God. But could you put your finger on why you were getting nervous?
Well, I mean, I'm generally, this is a surprising admission, I'm generally get uncomfortable in public situations, speaking or doing that briefing every day. I picked a lousy career to have, given that that is the way I am personally. But it's also it kept you on edge because, and actually we'll remember there's a great State Department spokeswoman, Margaret Tutwiler, who worked during the George Bush 41 years for Jim Baker when he was Secretary of State, and she and I had become friends, and she once told me, she said, if you ever go out to do that briefing and you think it's going to be a breeze and you don't have butterflies in your stomach and you're not a little bit nervous, you better turn right around and go back in because you're missing something. And sure enough, the days where you think, this will be a piece of cake today, those are the days in which you forgot to get an answer, or the press had some kind of line of questioning that was embarrassing that you should have thought through and been better prepared for. So that was part of my way, was just being prepared. Was I got habitually nervous to make sure that I was thinking through and trying to anticipate all the different questions that come up.
That's very interesting. We're going to need to take a break, Mike, but we're going to be right back with Mike McCurry.
Pacific Ocean!
We're back with Mike McCurry, press secretary to President Clinton and also a senior advisor to the Kerry campaign. I want to move on to the Kerry campaign. And did it have the same excitement for you to be involved with the Kerry campaign since you're such a veteran of politics in the White House? But did it have that same type of excitement for you?
Well, I had a lucky deal in a way, because I came into the campaign very late. I was asked by Senator Kerry to join his traveling operation on the road. So I went out to sort of be the traveling press secretary with only about 6 weeks to go until Election Day. And that's right in the prime time of the campaign. So for me, yeah, it was exciting. Of course, that's a very grueling pace. I turned 50 during the time that I was on the road.
Congratulations.
And it's a great way to spend the 50th birthday. But it was a reminder that this is a process that's much more suited for people who are 20-something because it really does take a lot out of you. It was, a real honor to be out campaigning with a presidential candidate. I've done that now for 7 different people who've run for either president or vice president. And every time you're reminded that it's a great process that we have, because it really requires candidates to go face to face with voters, really make an argument about America's future and lay out some idea of how we're going to change things or what direction we're going to go, what is the path forward. And it works pretty well. I think that we make decisions, even when we have a very closely contested election like the one we had in 2004, you get some sense that at least the American people get a chance to really think through the issues. This was one thing about this campaign. Of course, I'm obviously very disappointed in the result, but I felt like we debated serious issues: war, peace, the future of Social Security, the future of our healthcare system. It was a campaign that was less taken off the tracks on tangential rides than most recent elections, and I think that was good for the American people.
Do the Democrats have to change a great deal? Do they have to steer the ship hard to the right? And I noticed one thing you said is it might be better if the Democrats could maybe identify or articulate issues clear, and one of those was abortion, and you said maybe Democrats could talk of it as safe, legal, but rare.
Yeah, I think there are a range of issues where we need to, adjust a little bit to the reality of the country and where the country is. I'm not one who says Democrats need to do things radically different, because after all, we got 48% of the vote. We got 56 million people to side with John Kerry, the most ever that have voted for a Democratic candidate. And I think we made some pretty real and important arguments about America's role in the world, about how we go to war when we have to go to war. I think Senator Kerry, carried the banner pretty well for our candidate. And I don't think we ought to just kind of wholesale rip up the playbook and say, look, we start all over. There are some things we need to do differently. And some of these hard moral issues, we have to recognize there are people who feel very deeply that abortion is murder, and that they just can't tolerate that. I mean, none of us would, if we saw a murder being committed, would just think we could stand by and sort of say we will tolerate that in some sense. And we have to understand that's the moral perspective that people who have that view, that strong anti-abortion view, that's what they believe. Similarly, on issues related to homosexuality in our society, particularly the issue of gay marriage, which was infused in this debate. These are not the only reasons why George Bush won. I don't think we should overinterpret some of the business about moral values being at the heart of the election. But on the other hand, people really do have strong moral views, and I think sometimes they believe Democrats tune that out or they don't respect that. I think we need to be a little more respectful of some of those hard decisions that people make from a moral perspective. If we do that and are a little more tolerant of that, and I think also if we understand a little more of the cultural values that shape a lot of thinking in those red states, I think if we do that, we're going to be better off. And if we get candidates who speak like that. But that, by the way, we were talking earlier in this interview about Bill Clinton. One of the secrets to his success, I think, is that he had lived and had a life experience that touched a lot of those people who might not vote for him or might not share his political perspective. But they always say, this guy, Clinton, I don't agree with him on the issues, but at least he understands me and my values. And I think we need candidates like that.
And that's important. And I know a lot of voters, and Democrats don't like to admit this, but a lot of voters could relate to Bush. I mean, he's kind of a plain-speaking, good-looking guy with a decent sense of humor, and they can relate to him. And I know that you're a big proponent of you need a candidate who can make the sale on the stump.
Yeah.
And so the candidate himself, it's separate and apart from the issues, is very important too.
I agree with that 100%. I think you really, at the end of the day, we look at a person's issues and substance and where they stand, but they also look at character, they look at their life experience, they look, is this someone who will understand who I am and what my life is about? And I think George Bush, we have to face the fact on this, he connects very well at some levels with a wide range of people in the country who say they can see in him someone who shares their sense of values. It was harder for them to see that with Senator Kerry because, frankly, Senator Kerry had a different life experience, and you know, he shouldn't be ashamed of the fact that he had an enormous amount of privilege growing up as a young person. But it was because of that, I think in some ways, a little bit harder for him to make the argument that, yeah, I really understand what life is like if you're middle income out in this country, you're struggling to make ends meet, you sit around the kitchen table at night trying to figure out which bills to pay. It's harder to imagine a John Kerry living in a great deal of privilege and personal wealth really understanding that. And it, you know, obviously George Bush's personal circumstances weren't any different than that growing up, but he communicated more of that sense of understanding.
I think that one time when Kerry did connect with the public, and this was before you were involved, but in the Iowa primary, when the Vietnam vet whose life he saved came back to Iowa, and he hadn't seen him since he saved his life, and they got together. It was very emotional, and that really, I think that turned the primary season around.
I think everybody who covered it, you're correct, I was not working in the campaign at that point, but I remember that vividly, seeing that on television. It was so authentic and genuine. And by the way, the fact that a group of people got together to try to take that away from John Kerry in a very ugly way, to sort of impugn the integrity of his service to our country in Vietnam. That was probably one of the low points of the campaign in many ways. But I think they, you know, certainly the Kerry campaign recovered from that and fought back after probably waiting a little too long. But they did get it, you know, out there that this guy really did do something truly noble in his service to our country in Vietnam. And it was important to say that. I think it was also important to remind people that there are legitimate ways in which you protest the way in which a nation goes to war, and that you raise those issues, and there's nothing unpatriotic about talking about the large questions of war and peace that ought to define what a great nation is about. And that's something that John Kerry did both as a young man after his service in Vietnam, but certainly he did during the course of the campaign, as he really raised the issue of what were we trying to do in Iraq, how did we go to war in the first place, and is that the right way in which a country makes critical decisions about war and peace.
And on the stump, Kerry, he seemed at sometimes maybe too eager to please some people, and I just raised two things that he said. One was, you know, he would still vote to go to war even if he knew now what that there was no weapons of mass destruction over there, and but that type of thing. I mean, was he having trouble on the stump with certain statements?
I think the subject of Iraq was a difficult one for him, because he had to present himself genuinely and truthfully as someone who had supported the resolution to take the country to war if necessary. Now, his argument was George Bush took that authority and badly misused it and didn't do the things that he said he would do in order to take the country to war. But that's a tough argument to have to make, because the country, again, you know, we were talking earlier, they want those black and white choices. And if, you know, Bush was the guy who took us to war and was for the war, and Kerry sounded sometimes like he was a guy against the war and the anti-war candidate, but that wasn't really where he was, because he had voted for the resolution. And I think that was a jarring juxtaposition, and I think it was hard for Senator Kerry to be clear on the issue.
What was election night like? I know you were in Boston, but you have in 2000 this was the case too. You have individuals, I'm talking about Gore and Kerry, that are so close to winning the presidency. I mean, they would be historical figures, you know, throughout the world, and they don't make it. But what is it like on election night to observe that and look at Kerry? And
this was the most extraordinary election night experience that I've ever been through, and I've been around lots of candidates on election nights, but this one was, I'll never forget this. We had Senator Kerry sitting in a chair much like this, doing his interviews straight into the camera with television anchors all throughout those battleground states in the middle West, in the big states like Iowa and Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin. And we had him there for 4 hours, from 3:30 in the afternoon till 7:30. And all during the time that he was doing the interviews and urging people to get out to vote and saying every last vote's going to matter, so please go vote, we were in the back room following what the networks were saying on through their exit polling, and more importantly, getting the reports from our own organizers on the ground, from our campaign people in all the key states who are saying this looks really good for us. We're getting all the numbers that we need to get. We're turning out all the performing numbers that we need to meet our targets in our campaign plan. So looks like these numbers we're seeing from the networks are right, that we're going to be winning all of these key states. We had thought, as you know, Senator Kerry wound down and finished up those interviews at 7:30 at night, and we thought we had not only won the presidency, but had won it going away, had won the states like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida. We still thought we had won even as late as 7:30 at night. So when Senator Kerry kind of got out of that, I mean, you know, to do 4 hours of these interviews where you really have to be on the money, and he was doing a great job to kind of get out of there. We said, you know, you did great, and you need to go home now and think about what you're going to say to the country later when you accept victory.
Incredible.
And so it was incredible. So he went home, left with Bob Shrum, his longtime strategist and speechwriter, to actually think about what to say in a victory speech. And of course, the roller coaster 6 hours later, we were in a much different place.
I know you're involved in your church, United Methodist in Kensington. You're superintendent of Sunday school, and I saw a quote where you said that what you do there is more important than your work as the press secretary.
Well, it's not. I mean, I guess what I meant was sometimes in Washington, in the world of official politics, we spin a lot of wheels and don't get much done. You know, we have a lot of great, profound debates, but in the end, nothing much changes. But when you're working at a church and you've got 7th and 8th graders who are sitting there in a Sunday school class, you know that you're touching those lives, and you know you're making a difference, and you actually can see the tangible results of your work, and it's a little more satisfying sometimes to have that kind of experience as opposed to being on the great national stage where you sometimes feel like you're spinning wheels.
And we have about a minute left, but in today's world you have people willing to take other people's lives, you have nuclear arms, you have terrorists. I mean, can you make sense of any of this? And I hate to hit you this with just a minute left, but...
Well, it's a great reminder that there is, in fact, enormous evil in the world. And as we were talking about my Sunday school experiences, some of the lessons come straight out of, the Bible and what we teach our kids, that there is an enormous evil. It has to be confronted. It has to be resisted because there are enormous temptations sometimes to do the wrong thing. But you have to live a life that really reminds you of what's moral and true and good, and we frankly need a lot more of that in politics. I'm a big believer that all of us in politics, whether Republicans or Democrats, would do better to be reminded of some of those moral virtues that are really part of who we are as the American people. And if we keep true on that course, I think we'll do just fine.
Well, let's end it there, Mike. Thanks so much for coming.
Great interview. Nice being with you.
And I'm Charles Duffy, and if it's Tuesday night at 9:30 or Thursday night at 9, it's Political Pulse on Channel 16. We'll see you next week. Thank you.
I can cause sudden headaches, dizziness, trouble walking, talking, seeing. What am I? I am a stroke. Learn to recognize a stroke.